The rejection had happened 6 months ago, but Elena Hartwood still woke up some mornings expecting to see Thomas's face beside her, before reality crashed down and reminded her that her mate had chosen status over love. The pain had dulled from a constant agony to a persistent ache, but it was still there, a permanent scar on her soul that would never fully heal. She had left the Riverside Pack the day after Thomas publicly rejected her in favor of mating with the Alpha's daughter. There had been no dramatic confrontation, no tearful goodbye. Elena had simply packed her few belongings, walked out of the territory, and kept walking until she found a small, abandoned cabin deep in neutral territory where no pack would bother to claim land. The cabin was barely standing when she found it. Roof half collapsed, windows broken, floor rotting in places. But it was shelter, and it was hers, and that was more than she'd had in a long time. She had spent 6 months slowly repairing it with her own hands, learning skills she'd never needed as a Pack Omega. How to patch a roof, how to hunt small game, how to forage for edible plants, how to survive completely alone. It wasn't a good life, but it was hers. And after being rejected for not being valuable enough to stand beside an ambitious alpha, there was something deeply satisfying about proving she could survive without anyone's approval or support. The winter had been brutal, though. Her small garden had died in the first frost, her traps were yielding less game as animals grew scarce, and she was down to her last supplies. This morning, she had exactly 1 loaf of bread left. Bread she had baked 3 days ago using the last of her flour. It was supposed to last her until she could make the 2-day journey to the nearest trading post, but she'd been stretching it out, eating as little as possible to make it last. Elena stood in her cabin doorway with the bread wrapped in cloth, trying to calculate if she could make it another day without eating, and save this for tomorrow's journey. She was already weak from hunger, already feeling lightheaded when she stood up too quickly. But if she ate today and had nothing for the journey... A sound outside caught her attention. It was faint, barely audible over the morning birdsong, but her Omega hearing picked it up clearly. A whimper. Pained and desperate, every practical instinct told Elena to ignore it. She had her own survival to worry about, and getting involved with whatever was making that sound could be dangerous. But 6 months of solitude hadn't killed her compassionate nature, and she found her feet carrying her toward the sound before her brain could override the decision. She found the wolf in the small clearing behind her cabin, and her heart immediately broke at the sight. It was enormous, clearly an alpha in shifted form, but so painfully thin that its ribs were visible through its fur. The animal was lying on its side, barely moving, golden eyes dull with starvation and exhaustion. "Oh, you poor thing," Elena whispered, approaching slowly so as not to startle it. The wolf's eyes tracked her movement, but it didn't try to run or show aggression. It was too weak even for that. As she got closer, Elena could see this wasn't just hunger. The wolf had injuries, old ones that had healed badly, suggesting it had been on its own for some time. There was a limp in its back leg, scars across its side, and the overall appearance of an animal that had been through hell and somehow survived. The practical voice in her head was screaming at her to leave it. This was an alpha wolf, probably from some pack dispute or territorial fight. Getting involved could bring trouble she couldn't afford. Plus, she had barely enough food for herself. She couldn't spare anything for a starving predator. But even as those thoughts formed, Elena was unwrapping the cloth that held her last loaf of bread. The wolf's eyes followed the movement, and she saw recognition flicker there. It knew what food looked like, and it was desperate. "I'm probably going to regret this," Elena said quietly, kneeling down within reach of the wolf's jaws. If it wanted to attack her, she would have no defense. But something about those golden eyes, about the way the animal looked at her with such hopeless resignation, told her it wouldn't hurt her. "This is all I have. My last food until I can get to town. But you need it more than I do." She broke the loaf in half, intending to at least keep some for herself. But looking at the wolf's emaciated form, at the way its eyes tracked every movement of her hands, Elena knew she couldn't do it. This creature was literally dying of starvation. Her hunger was bad, but it wasn't fatal yet. "Here," she said, offering the entire loaf. "Take it all. Maybe it'll give you enough strength to hunt for yourself." The wolf stared at her for a long moment, and Elena could have sworn she saw understanding in those golden eyes. Understanding and something else. Disbelief, perhaps, that anyone would show such kindness to a stranger. Then the animal carefully took the bread from her hands, eating slowly despite obvious hunger. Elena stayed kneeling beside it, watching to make sure it didn't choke in its desperation, her hand resting gently on its massive head. "You're going to be okay," she murmured, not knowing if she was trying to convince the wolf or herself. "You'll get your strength back and find your pack again, and I'll figure something out, I always do." The wolf finished the bread and rested its head against her knee, making a sound that was almost like a purr. Elena found herself stroking its fur, taking comfort in the contact. She had been so alone for so long, and even this brief connection with another living being was more precious than food. "I should go check my traps," she said eventually, though she knew they would probably be empty like they had been for the past week. "You rest here as long as you need. The cabin isn't much, but at least it's shelter." She stood to leave, and the wolf's eyes followed her movement. Then, to her surprise, the animal struggled to its feet. It was shaky and clearly weak, but it managed to stand and take a few steps toward the forest. "Wait," Elena called out. "You're not strong enough to travel yet. At least rest for the day." But the wolf kept walking, disappearing into the trees with a determination that suggested this was important. Elena watched until it was out of sight, then returned to her cabin feeling oddly empty despite having done the right thing. Her stomach growled with hunger, reminding her that she now had absolutely nothing to eat and no way to get food until she made the journey to town. A journey she was now too weak to attempt. "Brilliant decision, Elena," she muttered to herself as she checked her small supply of water. "Save a strange wolf and starve yourself in the process. Thomas was right. You're too soft-hearted for your own good." The thought of Thomas made her chest ache. He had said that to her once, had told her that her compassionate nature would get her killed someday. At the time she had thought it was concern. Now she understood it had been criticism. In his world, compassion was weakness, and weakness had no value. Elena spent the day trying to distract herself from hunger by working on repairs to her cabin. She patched a hole in the roof, reinforced a weak section of wall, and organized her few possessions for the 100th time. Physical work helped, but by evening she was lightheaded and shaking from lack of food. She went to bed that night with water to fill her stomach and hoped that tomorrow she would feel strong enough to attempt the journey to town. The alternative was staying here and slowly starving, which wasn't really an alternative at all. Sleep came fitfully, broken by dreams of bread she couldn't eat and wolves with judging golden eyes. Elena was woken by sound just as dawn was breaking. Not animal sounds or wind through trees, but something else. Footsteps, many footsteps, moving with organized precision toward her cabin. Fear spiked through her as she scrambled out of bed and moved to the window. Through the early morning mist, she could see figures emerging from the forest. Dozens of them, maybe more, all wearing what looked like formal armor or ceremonial clothing. Had she accidentally built her cabin on claimed territory? Were these wolves coming to drive her out, or worse? Then she saw him at the front of the group, and her breath caught in her throat. Even from a distance, even in human form, she could recognize the wolf from yesterday. The same powerful build, the same bearing, the same golden eyes that were now staring directly at her cabin. But this wasn't the starving, injured creature she had fed. This was an alpha in full strength and obvious authority, wearing clothing that marked him as someone of significant rank. And he was walking straight toward her door. Elena's first instinct was to run, but there was nowhere to go. She was surrounded by what looked like an entire pack's worth of wolves, all of them clearly following the man she had helped yesterday. A knock sounded on her door, polite, but carrying an authority that suggested refusing to answer wasn't really an option. Elena wrapped her worn shawl around her shoulders and opened the door with trembling hands. The alpha from yesterday stood there, now in human form, and he was even more striking than she had imagined. Tall and powerfully built, with dark hair and those same golden eyes that had looked at her with such desperate hope when she offered him food. But what made her gasp was what he was doing. He was bowing. Not a small nod of greeting, but a full, deep bow of the kind that alphas never gave to anyone, least of all to packless omegas living in broken-down cabins. "My lady," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness. "I am Aldrich Thornwood, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and I have come to thank you for saving my life." The words hit Elena like physical blows. Alpha King. She had given her last food to the Alpha King himself. "I don't understand," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were starving. You were hurt. How?" "I was ambushed 2 weeks ago by rogues hired to kill me," Aldrich explained, still bowing. And Elena noticed that every wolf behind him had also dropped to their knees or bowed their heads. "They used silver weapons and left me to die in the wilderness. I've been wandering in wolf form ever since, too weak to shift back, slowly dying from a combination of silver poisoning, injuries, and starvation." "But you're the Alpha King," Elena protested, still trying to process this. "Surely you have people looking for you, an entire kingdom searching." "They were searching," Aldrich confirmed. "But I had traveled far from my last known location, and the rogues had been clever about covering their tracks. My people had no idea where to look, and I was too weak to call for help or find my way home." He straightened, finally, but the respect in his eyes remained. "Yesterday I was hours from death. Literally hours. I could feel my body shutting down, my wolf giving up. And then you found me." "I just gave you some bread," Elena said, confused by the magnitude of his reaction. "It wasn't some great heroic act. You were starving, and I had food." "You gave me your last food," Aldrich corrected, his voice intense. "You were starving yourself, barely surviving, and you gave a strange wolf everything you had left. Do you understand how rare that is? How extraordinary? Anyone would have done the same." "No." The word was firm. Absolute. "They wouldn't have. I've been Alpha King for 15 years, and I've seen the worst and best of our kind. Most wolves would have seen a starving predator and protected their resources. Even kind wolves would have maybe thrown me scraps. But you gave everything. You sacrificed your own survival for a creature you had never met." He took a step closer, and Elena found she couldn't look away from those golden eyes. "That bread gave me just enough strength to shift back to human form and call for help. My pack found me within hours and brought me home. The healers managed to purge the rest of the silver from my system. You saved my life, Elena Hartwood. And I owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid." The use of her full name made her blink in surprise. "How do you know my name?" "I have spent the entire night learning everything about you," Aldrich replied. "About the rejection you suffered, about your exile from the Riverside Pack, about the 6 months you've spent surviving alone in this cabin, about how you've asked for nothing from anyone and expected even less." "That's just called not being part of a pack," Elena said, feeling defensive and not entirely sure why. "It's not special. It is when you could have begged for help at any pack's borders and probably been accepted out of pity," Aldrich countered. "But you chose independence and self-sufficiency instead. You chose dignity over charity. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." He gestured to the wolves behind him, and several of them stepped forward carrying baskets and bundles that they began setting down near Elena's door. "Food," Aldrich explained. "Enough to last you several months. Fresh bread, smoked meat, vegetables, flour, honey, everything you could need. It's a small payment on the debt I owe you, but it's a start." "I can't accept this," Elena protested, even as her treacherous stomach growled at the smell of fresh bread. "It's too much. It's not nearly enough." Aldrich's voice carried a note of frustration. "Elena, you gave me your life when you had nothing to spare. Let me at least make sure you don't starve while living alone in the wilderness." "I'm fine on my own," Elena insisted, wrapping her arms around herself. "I've been managing." "You've been slowly starving," Aldrich corrected bluntly. "I could see it yesterday even through my wolf's desperate hunger. You're malnourished and exhausted, and winter isn't even fully here yet. What happens when the real cold sets in and you can't maintain your traps or make the journey to town?" The truth of his words made Elena's defenses crumble slightly. She had been trying not to think about that, about the fact that her survival strategy for winter was basically hope for the best and try not to freeze or starve. "Even if I accept the food," she said quietly, "it doesn't change anything. I'm still a rejected Omega with no pack. I'm still living alone in a broken cabin because I have nowhere else to go. Your debt, if you feel you owe me one, can be considered paid with the food. And then you can go back to your kingdom and forget about the Omega who gave you bread." "No." The single word carried such absolute finality that Elena actually took a step back. "I will not forget you. I cannot forget you. Because Elena, when I was lying in my wolf form yesterday and you knelt down to give me your last food, something happened. Something I've been waiting my entire life to experience." He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body and smell his alpha scent, pine and earth, and something that made her Omega nature sit up and take notice despite her best efforts to ignore it. "The mate bond formed," Aldrich said quietly, his golden eyes locked on hers. "In that moment of supreme compassion, when you chose to save a stranger over yourself, the moon goddess revealed that we are destined mates. You are my true partner, Elena. The other half of my soul." The words crashed over Elena like a wave, and she found herself gripping the doorframe to stay upright. "That's not possible. I already had a mate. Thomas was supposed to be my destined partner." "Thomas was a compatible match, not a true mate," Aldrich corrected gently. "True mate bonds are rare. Only 1 in 1,000 wolves ever experiences them. Thomas could reject you because your bond wasn't written in your very souls. But this—" He took her hand, and the contact sent electricity racing through both of them. "This cannot be rejected or denied. We are bound by the moon goddess herself." "No," Elena whispered, pulling her hand back, even though it felt like tearing away part of herself. "No, I can't do this again. I can't be someone's mate just to be rejected when they realize I'm not good enough. I can't survive that pain twice. I would never reject you." Aldrich's voice was fierce, carrying absolute conviction. "Elena, you are the most valuable person I have ever met. Not because of your status or connections or what you can offer politically, but because you have the kind of heart that puts others before yourself, even when it costs everything. That is true nobility. That is what makes someone worthy of standing beside a king." "You don't know me," Elena protested weakly. "Yesterday was one moment, one decision. It doesn't define who I am." "It defines exactly who you are," Aldrich countered. "Character isn't shown in easy moments when you have plenty. It's shown in hard moments when you have nothing and still choose to give. You passed a test yesterday that most wolves would fail, and you didn't even know you were being tested." Elena felt tears building behind her eyes. "I can't be a queen. I can't be whatever you need me to be. I'm just a rejected Omega who lives in a broken cabin and barely survives day to day." "You're my mate," Aldrich said simply. "Everything else can be learned or adapted to. But the bond between us is eternal and unbreakable. The question is not whether you're worthy of being queen. You already proved that. The question is whether you're brave enough to accept the gift the moon goddess has given us." "I'm not brave," Elena whispered. I'm terrified. Terrified of hoping again, of trusting again, of believing that someone could actually want me. Then let me prove it to you. Aldrich gestured to the wolves behind him, and they all immediately dropped to one knee. Every member of my personal guard, every wolf who serves me directly, bears witness to my words. I, Aldrich Thornwood, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, claim Elena Hartwood as my true mate and future queen. Any who question her worth or her right to stand beside me will answer to me personally. The declaration rang through the clearing with the weight of an oath, binding and absolute. Elena felt the mate bond pulse between them in response, confirming what Aldrich was saying, even though her mind was still struggling to accept it. Why? The question came out as barely more than a breath. Why do you want me? Really? Aldrich stepped closer, close enough that Elena had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Because yesterday, when I was at my lowest, when I had nothing to offer and looked like a dying animal, you saw past all of that to the living being who needed help. You didn't ask what I could do for you or what benefit helping me might bring. You just gave, freely and completely, because it was the right thing to do. His hand came up to gently cup her face, and Elena found she couldn't pull away from the touch. That is the kind of person I want beside me. Someone who leads with their heart, who sees value in all beings regardless of status, who would give their last piece of bread to a starving stranger. That is true royalty, Elena. That is what makes someone fit to rule. I don't know how to be a queen, Elena said again, but her voice lacked the conviction it had held before. I'll teach you. We'll learn together. Aldrich's thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. But Elena, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to accept me because of duty or obligation, or because the mate bond makes it inevitable. I'm asking because I genuinely want you as my partner. Because I want to spend every day proving that your compassion and strength and beautiful heart are valued and treasured. What if I fail? What if I'm not strong enough for this? Then we'll fail together and figure it out as we go. But I don't think you'll fail. Someone who can survive 6 months alone in the wilderness, who can rebuild a cabin with their bare hands, who can give away their last food to a stranger, that person is strong enough for anything. Elena looked past Aldrich to the wolves kneeling behind him, all of them watching with expressions of respect and something that looked like hope. She looked at the baskets of food they had brought, enough to ensure she wouldn't have to worry about starvation anymore. She looked at the cabin she had painstakingly rebuilt, the symbol of her independence and survival. And she looked back at Aldrich, at the genuine care and respect in his golden eyes, at the way he had bowed before her cabin like she was already a queen, at the mate bond that hummed between them with undeniable truth. If I say yes, she said slowly, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise that if I'm not good enough, if I can't be what you need, you'll tell me honestly. No public rejection, no humiliation, just honesty. I can survive being told I'm not sufficient. I can't survive being blindsided again. Pain flashed across Aldrich's face. Elena, you will always be more than sufficient. But I promise, I will always be honest with you about everything. No secrets, no hidden expectations, just truth between us. Always. Then, Elena took a deep breath, feeling like she was standing on the edge of a cliff about to jump. Then yes, I accept. The mate bond, the role of queen, all of it. Not because I think I deserve it, but because I'm choosing to be brave enough to try. The smile that spread across Aldrich's face was radiant enough to outshine the rising sun. Thank you, he breathed, pulling her into an embrace that felt like coming home. Thank you for being brave enough to give this a chance. When he kissed her, the mate bond exploded between them with such force that Elena gasped. This was nothing like what she had felt with Thomas. That had been a gentle warmth, pleasant but not overwhelming. This was fire and lightning and coming alive in ways she had never imagined possible. When they finally broke apart, Elena found herself laughing through tears. This is insane. Yesterday I was starving in a cabin. Today I'm apparently going to be queen. Today, you're going to start the journey toward being queen, Aldrich corrected with a smile. The actual coronation will take some time. First, you need to come home with me, meet the pack, learn about your new role. But Elena, there's no rush. We'll go at whatever pace feels comfortable for you. Can I bring some things from the cabin? She gestured to her small home, the place that had sheltered her through 6 months of isolation. I know it's not much, but some of these things are important to me. Bring whatever you want, Aldrich assured her. We can even have the whole cabin transported if you'd like. I want you to feel at home, not like you're giving up everything you built. Over the next hour, with help from Aldrich's guards, Elena packed her few precious possessions. Her grandmother's quilt, her small collection of books, the tools she had used to rebuild the cabin. As she worked, Aldrich stayed close, answering her questions about what life in the royal territory would be like and reassuring her when anxiety threatened to overwhelm her. There's something else you should know, Aldrich said as they prepared to leave. About why I was alone in the wilderness when the rogues attacked. You said you were ambushed. I was, but I wasn't traveling with guards or on official business. I was. He hesitated, and Elena saw vulnerability in his expression. I was searching. For something. For someone. The old legends say that true mates can be found in unexpected places during moments of genuine need or testing. I had been traveling through the territories alone, observing my people without the trappings of power, hoping that maybe if I was just another wolf, my mate might reveal themselves. You were testing people, Elena realized, seeing how they treated a stranger who couldn't offer them anything. Yes, and I'm not proud of it because it's manipulative. But Elena, I was desperate. 15 years as Alpha King, surrounded by wolves who wanted to be my mate for status or power or political advantage, and not one genuine connection. I needed to know if someone existed who could see past the crown to the person underneath. He took her hands in his golden eyes intense. I visited 12 packs, met hundreds of wolves. Some ignored me. Some were openly hostile to a strange wolf in their territory. Some were politely dismissive. But you gave everything you had without asking who I was or what I could offer you in return. You saw a creature suffering and responded with pure compassion. That's when I knew, not just that the bond was real, but that you were exactly what I had been hoping to find. So yesterday was a test, Elena said, but there was no accusation in her voice, just understanding. It started as one, Aldrich admitted, but it became something much more important than any test. It became the moment I found my mate, my partner, my future. And Elena, if you feel deceived or manipulated by this, we can discuss it. I don't want secrets between us. Elena thought about it for a long moment, then shook her head. I'm not angry. If you had appeared as the Alpha King and asked me for food, I probably would have given it out of fear or obligation. But yesterday, I helped because I wanted to, because it was the right thing to do. The fact that it revealed something important about both of us doesn't change that. Relief flooded Aldrich's features. You're extraordinary, you know that. I'm really not, Elena replied. I'm just someone who doesn't like seeing others suffer. That quality is rarer than you think. The journey to the royal territory took 3 days, and during that time, Elena learned more about the man who was now her mate. Aldrich told her about his life, about losing his parents young and having to take the throne before he felt ready, about the loneliness of leadership and the weight of knowing thousands of wolves depended on his decisions. But he also told her about his dreams of creating a more just society, about reforms he wanted to implement but couldn't without the right support, about how he had been waiting for a partner who would help him see what he was missing, who would care about the wolves others overlooked. You're going to be perfect for this, he said on the second night as they sat around the campfire. Because you understand what it's like to be overlooked and dismissed. You know what it feels like to be judged for circumstances beyond your control. That perspective is exactly what our kingdom needs. I still don't feel qualified, Elena admitted. Every time I think about standing in front of your court as queen, I want to run back to my cabin and hide. That's called humility, and it's a virtue. Aldrich's smile was warm. I'll take a queen who questions her own abilities over one who assumes she knows everything. We'll figure it out together, Elena. I promise you're not going into this alone. When the royal palace finally came into view, Elena felt her breath catch. It was massive and beautiful, built of stone that seemed to glow in the afternoon light. Wolves were gathered at the gates to welcome their returning king, and the cheers that erupted when they saw Aldrich were deafening. But the cheers faltered slightly when the crowd noticed Elena at his side. She could see the confusion, the surprise, the judgment in many faces as they took in her simple clothing and obvious Omega status. Aldrich noticed too, and his hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Watch," he murmured. Then, in full view of his entire court, the Alpha King dropped to one knee before Elena. The gesture was shocking enough that the crowd fell completely silent. "This woman saved my life," Aldrich's voice carried clearly to every witness. "When I was dying and alone, when I looked like just a starving wolf worth nothing, she gave me her last food. She sacrificed her own survival to help a stranger. That is true nobility. That is the mark of a genuine leader. And that is why she is my mate and your future queen." He stood and addressed the crowd directly. "I know some of you will question this choice. Some of you will think she doesn't have the right breeding or connections or training. But I say to all of you, Elena Hartwood has something infinitely more valuable than any of those things. She has a heart that puts others before herself, a strength that survives against impossible odds, and a compassion that recognizes the worth of all beings. Anyone who cannot see her value is blind, and anyone who questions my choice will answer to me personally." The declaration rang through the courtyard with the weight of law, and Elena watched as wolf after wolf dropped to their knees in respect. Not all of them looked happy about it, but they all acknowledged Aldrich's authority. "That," Aldrich said quietly to Elena, "is how you establish that someone is not to be questioned or dismissed, by making it clear that doing so is an offense against me personally." The days that followed were overwhelming. Elena was given rooms more beautiful than anything she had ever imagined, tutors to teach her about pack politics and history, staff to help her with anything she needed. But what struck her most was how Aldrich kept his promise to never leave her feeling alone or abandoned. He was always there, at her lessons, at her meals, walking with her through the palace gardens, answering her countless questions with patience and care. "You don't have to spend all your time with me," Elena told him after a week. "You're the Alpha King. You must have important things to do." "Nothing is more important than making sure my mate feels supported and valued," Aldrich replied firmly. "Elena, you gave up your independence and solitude for me. The least I can do is make sure you never regret that choice." 2 weeks after arriving at the palace, Elena stood on a balcony overlooking the training grounds where young wolves were learning to fight. She was thinking about her old cabin, about how different her life was now, when Aldrich found her. "Homesick?" he asked gently. "A little," Elena admitted. "Not for the starvation or isolation, but for the simplicity, knowing exactly what I needed to do each day to survive. Here, everything is so complicated." "Would you like to visit the cabin?" Aldrich offered. "We could go this weekend, just the two of us. You could check on it, make sure it's still standing. Maybe spend a night there if you wanted." The offer was so thoughtful, so understanding of what she needed, that Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. "You would do that? Take time away from your duties just to visit my broken-down cabin?" "Elena, you are not separate from my duties." You are central to them. Making sure you're happy and comfortable is one of the most important responsibilities I have. He pulled her into his arms, and Elena let herself lean into his strength. Besides, I'd like to see the place where you survived alone for 6 months. It's part of your story, part of what made you who you are. The official mating ceremony was held a month after Elena arrived at the palace, once she had time to adjust and prepare. Wolves from across the territory came to witness their alpha king bind himself to the rejected Omega who had shared her bread, and the symbolism was not lost on anyone. During the ceremony, Aldrich did something unexpected. He had a small piece of bread, the same type Elena had given him, blessed by the pack's spiritual leader, and presented it to Elena in front of all the witnesses. "You gave me bread when I had nothing, and you had less than nothing," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the great hall. "You gave without expectation of return, without knowing who I was or what I could offer. That bread saved my life, but more than that, it revealed your character. So I return it to you now, blessed and transformed, as a reminder that what you see as simple acts of kindness are actually the most powerful magic in existence." As Elena accepted the bread, feeling its warmth in her hands, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a rejected Omega starving in a cabin, to a queen standing beside her mate in front of their people. When they sealed their bond with a kiss that sent sparks of magic dancing through the air, Elena finally understood what the moon goddess had known all along. She wasn't broken or insufficient or too soft-hearted. She was exactly what she needed to be: compassionate, strong, and brave enough to give everything even when she had nothing. The rejected Omega who shared her bread had become the most beloved queen in living memory, not because of her status or training, but because she never forgot what it felt like to be hungry, to be alone, to be dismissed. And that memory made her a leader who saw value in all wolves, regardless of their rank or circumstances. At dawn on the day after their mating ceremony, Elena stood outside the palace and watched as Aldrich bowed before her one more time, repeating the gesture he had made at her cabin door. "You don't need to keep bowing to me," she said with a smile. "I'm your mate now, not just someone you're trying to honor." "I bow because you deserve to be honored," Aldrich replied, straightening and pulling her close. "Every day, for the rest of our lives, I want you to remember that moment when a king knelt before your cabin. Because that's how valuable you are, Elena. Worth bowing to, worth treasuring, worth everything." And as the sun rose over the royal territory, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Elena finally believed him. She was worthy, she was valuable, she was exactly where she belonged. All because she had shared her bread with a starving wolf, and that simple act of kindness had changed everything.